Okay, come, let's begin. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about Singapore car policies. There are far too many policies that we can go through. So I'm just going to run through a few key ones. But before we start, what are the policies, right? Let's look at the aims of the government as far as Singapore car policies pertaining to A-level concepts. So the primary aims, of course, is to correct market failure caused by traffic congestion as well as air pollution. Right. So in order to solve these two problems, right, we want to use certain set of policies. So let's sample the policies first. So, oh, sorry, my mistake. Let's look at the policies. Let's look at market failure caused by pollution first. So pollution, right, is a negative externality. So you can see from here, right, MSC is higher than MPC. So what we have here is a vertical gap called the marginal external cost. So obviously, when we explain a negative externality, we'll assume no positive externality. So we assume MEB equals to 0. Right, so private optimum occurs at the intersection of MPC and MPV, while social optimum occurs at the intersection of MSC and MSV. So this results in what we call an over consumption, right, of car travel by car. So this results in a deadweight loss area. So this will be for the pollution problem. Now we've just drawn for simplicity, right? The MEC is constant throughout. So this makes things a little simpler for us. However, when it comes to congestion, right, things get a little bit more interesting. Right, so for congestion, what you have is we draw a pivot at this point. So the divergence between social cost and private cost, right, which is the external cost, doesn't occur only until a certain level, a certain threshold level of traffic. So when there's low level of traffic, you don't really get congestion. So then there is no QS and QP will be the same if the demand for travel by car is low. But once the demand gets high, then you will have a divergence here. So in the same way, it can lead to a deadweight loss equals to this area. All right, so these are the two market failures that you learn in JC1. For those of you who are RI JC1, if you're online, right, you haven't learned this yet, right? But those of you who are from any other JC, you have learned negative externalities again. This will be how you draw congestion. Sorry, I forgot to change this. This should be congestion caused by cars, while the previous page will be for pollution caused by cars. All right, so with that set up, right, the two sources of market failure. So let's look at what are the policies. So Singapore's car policy, right, can be generally classified into 5 main categories. The first category of what we call ownership control. So important name. So please learn this name in the exam. You would want to be able to use this name explicitly. Then the next thing you want to be able to use is called usage control. So ownership control are controls over the purchase of cars, right? Who gets to own cars, how many cars are being bought. Usage controls will be controls over the cars that are being bought, how frequently are they used, how intensely are they used. All right, then the next two policies, right, are policies to reduce MEC. These one are rather interesting policies, so this one important to also take note of. So for these two are the standard policies, know the names. These two policies are interesting to present in exam, maybe case study, maybe essay will be useful, right? And the last one is just more for scope, right? So you can also bring in, because this one is more about demand side issue. So clearly there are far too many policies than you can have time in the exam to present, but we'll just learn them because these are the key policies in Singapore. So let's learn one by one. The first one, right, is called ownership control. So ownership control, the most basic method in Singapore to do ownership control is indirect taxes. So what is this indirect tax? The indirect tax basically is what we call import tax. Now, most of you realize that Singapore has a very, very high import tax on cars, right? But actually we don't. We have a 20% import tax, right? So this is called the 20% of the open market value of the cars. So basically the cost of importing the car plus the shipping, etc., right? So this is what is the base value of bringing the car into Singapore. So if the car cost maybe, let's say, $20,000 to bring in, or $25,000 to bring in, $20,000, 20% will be just $4,000, right? If it's 25%, then 10% is $2,500, 20% is just $5,000. So it looks like a very small amount. Then there's this thing called the registration fee, called the RF. RF is a flat fee. RF is a flat fee of $350 per car, right? The car and taxi is all the same. So no matter whether you buy luxury car or small little car, it's the same flat fee. So this flat fee is just nothing, right? It's an indirect tax, but it's a very tiny amount. Now, this additional registration fee, also known as the ARF, right, is where is the killer, right? What does the ARF do? So I'll show you the next slide, right? The ARF, right, what it does is it imposes a 100% tax on the OMV value of the first 20,000 of the car value. Then anything above 20,000, right, to $40,000, it is taxed at 140%. Then if it goes beyond that, then it's higher and higher. So if let's say your car has an OMV, right, of let's say 100K, so you will split into the first 20K, then the next 20K, then the next 20K, and then the next 20K, and then the next 20K. So this will be 100% of 20K, so that's 20K, right? This will be 140% of 20K, so 10% of 20K is 2K, right? So 100, so this is $28,000, sorry, 28K, right? Then this will be 190%, so that will be like 190% of 20K, right, will be like 38K, right? $38,000, and so on and so forth. So your total tax, right, is the sum of all these, right? So this is 250K or 250% of 20K, right? So that is this is $50,000, right? So it's just a very large amount. So all these taxes put together, right, will cost what we call an ad valorem tax on the, or this is specific, right? This is a fixed dollar amount, right? The rest is just ad valorem. Right, so if we draw a non-parallel shift, so what it does is it causes the price of cars to rise in Singapore and quantity to decrease. So basically, this is ownership control. They are making it expensive for people to own cars as a way to discourage people to drive. Now, however, right, this is not the end of it, right? So maybe QS, right, is even lower than Q1. So the government says, well, we're going to introduce this thing called the quota. So vehicle quota system, right, is a limit on number of new cars to be bought. So what the government does is it sets a quota, right, for each quarter. So every 3 months, the government sets a quota of new cars to be bought, and this quota is based on what we call a zero growth principle. That means total car population should not change. So in the last quarter, how many cars have been deregistered and removed from the road will free up how many vacancies for new cars to be bought and to enter the road. So this is a very, very small number, right? Maybe a couple of thousand per month only, right? So then they set a Qmax. Now, a quota is really known as a quantity ceiling. For those of you who are not familiar with this, right, if you recall in JC1, you learned this thing called a price ceiling. A price ceiling basically is something that the government imposes as a maximum allowable price, right? The price cannot go higher than Pmax. Then Qmax is nothing more than a quantity ceiling, right? A quota is basically setting a maximum upper limit of how many cars can be bought, right? So this is the policy of, so on top of your ownership controls, in terms of the taxes, the registration fee, and the ARF. Oh, sorry, by the way, I forgot to mention there's also GST, right? GST of 9%, right, is applied to the import tax. GST is applied to the, GST is not applied to import tax. GST applied to registration fee. GST is applied to the additional registration fee. So basically, you are paying tax on tax. So the GST is tax upon the import. I can't quite remember if this is import tax, but basically there's a tax on tax, right? So you pay taxes on the cars, you pay 9% GST on those taxes as well, right? So it's basically a compounding of taxes. Then on top of that, we impose a quota of Qmax, right? And once we create a quota of Qmax, right, then it creates a gap between what is the price that consumers are willing and able to pay to buy up to this Qmax number of cars, and what is the minimum price that car dealers in Singapore are willing and able to accept. So this is the maximum price buyers are willing and able to pay. This is the minimum price car dealers are willing to accept. Now, this gap, right, becomes really, really important now. At this minimum price, the car dealer say, oh, I'm prepared to receive, let's say, a low price of, I don't know, $35,000 to sell this car. At this price, right, based on the demand curve, right, there'll be so many people who wish to buy cars, right? So let's call this whatever, like Q1 prime or something. So then what you immediately have is a shortage. So the government say, okay, I'm prepared to give up, let's say, 1,000 licenses to buy cars. So who wants? Then lots of people say, I want to buy a car, I want to buy a car, right? So the government say, oh, I don't have enough licenses to go about to give everyone. So what are you going to do? You're going to fight it out, right? So how are you going to fight it out? You fight it out by bidding for what we call the Certificate of Entitlement. So the COE, right, is basically a piece of paper which is a license to own a car. Now, how to determine the COE price? So what I've done, right, I've just duplicated the axis here and brought it over this side. I've also duplicated the demand curve. So this demand curve is basically the same demand curve here. And I brought the quota here and I reproduced the same line. And notice the value is still Qmax. Now, this is the market for COE, right, in each month, let's say, or each quarter. So what's going to happen now, right? Watch, So this is the demand, how much people are willing and able to pay for cars. But if the car dealer, right, is saying that, but you could pay me P low, right? P low value for the car. So then what's going to happen now, right? Here's important, I'll watch carefully. So what's going to happen now, right, is that if the demand subtract away the price, right, after we subtract away the price you need to pay for the car, then whatever is the leftover demand after paying for the P low, right, then this will be called the residual demand, right? That means if I was prepared to pay, let's say, $100,000, right, to buy the car, the seller is saying that I'm prepared to sell the car for $35,000, then the difference between these two, which is $65,000, is the maximum that we are prepared to pay to buy the COE, right? So this equilibrium here will be your COE price of $65,000, right? So the intersection of the demand curve subtracting the P low price, right, will be the price you will pay for the COE. Hang on, Justin asking whether I'm going to post this. I plan to post this video. I think it should be auto. I was told. I'm hoping it worked, but I cannot promise because my first time. So if I screw up, then I'm sorry. All right. So anyway, this is the way to analyze using a micro demand supply model on how a quota works and how the licensing mechanism called the COE works and how COE prices are determined. Right, so in terms of your school, right, I'm not sure if your school will teach you using this model. I've seen some school teach like this. I've seen some school take a much more simplified model, but certainly at A level, if you were to use such a model, it could look impressive, right? But it will take a bit of time, so please be very familiar before you use it. All right, so that's the ownership control. So recap what are the ownership controls. We have ownership controls in terms of indirect taxes. So your import taxes, your registration fee, your ARF, and then on top of that, we have another quantity control, or ownership control rather, which is in terms of the vehicle quota system and the accompanying licensing mechanism called the COE. All right, so with that, then we move to the next policy. The next policy is what we call usage control. So usage control is like, okay, now you decide to own your car. In spite of me making it expensive, you decided to buy your car. Then I'll try to discourage you from driving too much, right? So other than things like, car park charges, etc., right? So the main key policy here is ERP, right? Electronic road pricing, that raises the marginal private cost. So what the government is hoping to do, hopefully, if the if the prices were to rise sufficiently, or rather if the COE price, ERP charges are rise sufficiently, it raises your marginal private cost, then this can cause people to perhaps use fewer cars or use their cars less frequently, or at least use it during the less peak period, right? So this is why, so ERP is a little bit more complicated. It's not just about trying to get people to use their car less frequently, but also to use it less during the peak period, and also to use it, use roads that are less congested, right? So maybe in future, right, with AI, right, the government's LTA has a better way to track the traffic situation on different roads, and then ERP can be like really dynamically, right, changing, right, in according to the road conditions. I'm not sure how the car drivers will be aware of what's the prices at any point in time, but so maybe it's still imperfect information, but that's all for the future, right? The basic principle here is that raising the cost, private cost to the individual driver, so that you will be discouraged from driving your car. So that's ERP. All right. Then next, another usage control is fuel excise tax. So fuel excise tax is the import tax on fuel. Okay, so in JC1, many of you learn this thing called specific tax and ad valorem tax, right? And a lot of students say, hey, what's an example of specific tax? This is an example of specific tax, right? Fuel tax in Singapore, right, is a specific tax. So it's not a percentage of the price. It is 64 cents to the liter, right? So it's a per unit. There's a fixed dollar amount. So if you look at the market for petrol, right, on this side of on the right side of the screen, right? So if you have a specific tax, this should lead to a non-parallel shift of the supply curve, right? So this will drive up the price of petrol, right? Now, what does this then do? What does this do to the diagram on the left? So in terms of the private benefit and private cost decision of consumer, the higher price, right, raises the cost of using a car, right? So then the MPC would be shifting upwards again, right? So the cost of using car rises, and this is what is meant to do. Right. Of course, I'm drawing it very simplistically. Every policy seems to go to QS, but really isn't. Right. Every policy is moving the QP a little bit closer to QS, and hopefully, right, the culmination of all the different policies come together will bring us closer to QS. All right. So next, so this is indirect taxes on fuel tax. Next, the policy aim at reducing MEC. This one is a special one I want you to pay special attention to. So policies aim at reducing the marginal external cost. Look at all the previous policies. All the previous policies, right, treat the QP as, we're over-consuming cars, right? So we try to get people to buy less cars, or ownership control, get people to buy less cars. Usage control, get people who already bought their cars to use their car less frequently. So it's always trying to discourage people from driving or using or buying cars. Now, this next class of policy is very interesting. It is trying to fulfill people's aspiration to own cars. Say, okay, you want to own a car, right? You want to be able to have a car, you want to drive a car, and you're prepared to pay our high taxes for it, right? Then go ahead and buy, right? But I still don't want to cause so much externalities. So what we do, we use road widening, road expansion, right, as a way to reduce the marginal external cost that drivers impose on each other, right? Then this thing called VES, right, is Vehicle Emission Scheme, and EEAI, right, which stands for the, I think, EV Early Adoption Initiative or something like that, right? So they are basically ways, right, that try to get people to use cars that are less polluting, so the marginal external cost is smaller, or creating wider roads, more roads, so that so my per unit driving, right, doesn't contribute as much to externality. Now, how to draw this? Now, this is where it gets interesting. So the difference between MPC and MSC is your MEC, right? So if we can somehow, right, cause the MEC to shrink, for example, to a new MEC 1, right, then what we might be able to do is to bring MSC down. So rather than shifting MPC up, rather than make it more costly for you to drive, we're making your driving less harmful to society, so the external cost shrinks, so the social cost drops closer to MPC. Now then, instead of QP moving to QS, we have a new QS, right, that is rising. So if you have a new QS that is rising, right, then your deadweight loss, right, now changes from the original deadweight loss area of this yellow color to a smaller deadweight loss now, which is this red color deadweight loss. right? So this will be an improvement. Now, maybe this policy was not meant to completely get rid of the dead weight loss, but this is contributing to the reduction of the dead weight loss. Plus all your other policies earlier, right, at trying to move QP down, right? So you're moving QP down using one set of policy, you're moving QS up using a different set of policy, right? So this will be example of policies to reduce MEC from a congestion point of view, and then the VES and EEAI are policies aimed at reducing MEC from a pollution point of view, right? So I've given you some details about the vehicle emission scheme. So this is your VES and your EEAI. So, sorry, it's not initiative, it's EV early adoption incentive. So basically some kind of tax incentive. You can see from here, you get 45% off the ARF, right? Up to $15,000 rebate, right? So that's remember ARF is that few 100% thing, right? So if you buy a electric vehicle that is expensive, you get almost like nearly half the discount, but of course limit up to 15% rebate only, right? But nonetheless, it is still a kind of incentive mechanism for people that who are going to drive. If you're going to drive anyway, you're prepared to pay the high taxes to drive, then at least try to get a cleaner vehicle, right? So this is the EEAI strategy. So in the exam, if you present this policy, make sure you learn how to draw the graph to show how you bring the MES closer. So you can see how this is a really interesting policy. But at the same time, it is a real world policy that not just Singapore uses, right? Many countries use a similar policy. So pretty much the Cambridge examiner is very familiar with this. All right, then the next policy is the encouragement of the use of alternatives, right? So what are these alternatives we are talking about? So development of public transport, for example, or what is known as the last mile connectivity. Okay, so first let's talk about public transport. So what are the key aspects of public transport? In Singapore, right, when we talk about trying to present public transport as the alternative, right, then we look at what is called the 3 C's of public transport. So you can be a bit descriptive here in the exam. Remember I told you for your thesis paragraph, you don't simply just identify a policy and then go straight into the diagram and explain how it works. Do a bit of description. Tell the examiner more about policy. What do you mean by the government of a country trying to promote public transport as a viable alternative? So the government tried to make sure that the cost, right, of public transport is affordable for the people. So it's low cost enough to be attractive, right? Then second, comfort, right? If your public transport is very uncomfortable, very hot, there's no air conditioning, or the seats are hard and uncomfortable, then people won't want to use it, right? And the last one is perhaps probably one of the most important components of why public transport can be alternative that is viable, right? Is convenience. So it's about getting people from point to point. So one of the goals that Singapore have, right? I remember this was when I was an undergraduate. This was early 1990, the mid 1990s. There was a LTA vision, right, to make the public transport entry point anywhere in Singapore. I assume that means only in civilian area, military area excluded. Anywhere in the civilian area in Singapore, that there is an entry point for the public transport. It means a bus stop or an MRT station or LRT station within a 400-meter walk, right? Now, I recently saw in some LTA website, right, we managed to bring it down to like 350 meters now, right? That means as of now, they have more than achieved that goal to be able to make entry into our public transport network within a 350 meter wherever you are in Singapore. I mean, wherever public area you are in Singapore, right? So that is about convenience, making it easy for people to use the public transport. Now, how would you draw this? Right? If you think about what's the private benefit of owning a car and driving a car, right, is that it gives me convenience, it gives me cost, right? As opposed to if I took public transport. Now, if the public transport is providing me with the comfort and convenience that is higher than before, right, then the MPB of getting a car, right, which is a net gain over public transport, will reduce. So this will cause your MPB to fall. Oops, let me redraw this. Looks a bit ugly. So So your MPB would decrease. Now, but if your MPB were to decrease, then you can also argue that your MSB, which is the sum of MPB, because there's no external benefit, will fall as well. So MPB1, MSB1 will fall. Then what's happening now, right, is that your QP and QS would both decline. Right, so you have QS1, QP1. So you realize that we're still at overconsumption, but the extent of the overconsumption becomes a little smaller. And if you look at the graph here, right, your deadweight loss, right, actually shrinks, right? So you have a bigger deadweight loss to begin with, and then you have a smaller deadweight loss. Now you might say, wait a minute, this policy, right, doesn't fully solve the problem. It best reduces. Fair enough, right? Fair enough, it reduces rather than solve. But it was never meant to be the only solution. It's meant to be used as a package of policies. So one of the questions that students always ask about how to evaluate multiple policies concurrently, right? One of the arguments you can present is that one policy may not on its own be able to solve the whole of the problem, right? Maybe one policy can at best, right, contribute to the reduction of a problem. The scale of the problem might be so big, right, that we need to share the workload of solving the problem across multiple policies, that each policy do a little bit. Like, for example, this policy aim at trying to reduce demand to make the deadweight loss smaller. Then the policy before, the one that reduces MEC, is trying to move QS nearer to QP. Then the policies before, right, the ownership control and usage control, is trying to move QP down to QS, right? So there's a plethora of policies all aiming to solve this one issue. All right, then lastly, let's talk about this last guy called last mile connectivity. What is this last mile connectivity? Basically, it's saying that when you reach your last MRT stop or reach your last LRT stop or your last bus stop, right, it's still not at your house yet, right? You're still going to get from that and the exit point from the public transport network to your home. So how do you get there? So they're trying to encourage people, right, to use your legs, right? So basically create nice sheltered walkways, pavements, so that people are comfortable to walk. So when it's raining or hot sun, you're still more relatively comfortable walking. People might use their bicycles, right? So the bike rentals, those kind of digital bike rentals, as well as dedicated bicycle lanes, park connectors. All these are part of the whole of government strategy, right? That means involving not just LTA, but NParks, NEA, all these coming in to create a network of footpaths, bicycle paths, bike rentals, for example, right? And sheltered walkways, to all this make it easy for people to finish the so-called last mile connectivity without having to use the car. So people say, yeah, but you see, if I buy a car, right, I can drive all the way to my house, right? But if I take MRT, right, MRT is still like, after the get off the MRT, I still got to walk 5 minutes under the hot sun to my house, or if it's raining, right, then it's not comfortable. So this is where the whole thinking process, right, includes getting right down to this last segment of the journey of a person. All right, so then this is the way to explain this point using demand. All right, so then using a demand decrease or MPB decrease. Okay, so with that, we finish the main key policies of Singapore. Just nice, 29 minutes and 1 minute earlier than 1 minute earlier than planned. All right, so then that's all I have for you. Those of you can log off. Those who want to stay back and ask some questions, please feel free to type in your questions. Thank you, Joshua, for coming. Yeah, not bad for my first post, first live. Why is so weird, Joshua? You're gonna ask Justin any question? Justin probably have tons of questions. Clara Teo asks, why is the tax specific tax? No, specific tax is constant dollar amount per unit of the good. So per unit here, per liter. Ad valorem is a certain percentage per dollar. So it's like maybe a 10% tax on the price of petrol. This is a 64 cents tax on every 1 liter. That's the meaning of specific tax. VES, Isabel asked about VES. Give me a moment. Let me go to the tab. So basically what VES is, right, is a scheme where the government says that, oh, if you're going to buy a car which is a EV, for example, look at, okay, so VES, right, if your car emissions are lower, right, that based on how much pollution that you will cause. So the band 1 cars, right, are the one that is perhaps least polluting. Band 2 cars are more polluting. Band C cars and band C2 cars are the ones that are more polluting, right? So the more polluting cars you have, right, you basically pay more surcharges, right? But if your car is a cleaner car, right, then you actually have a negative surcharge, right? It means a rebate given to you, right? So that lowers your ownership cost, right? So that means it's cheaper to buy the car. So earlier we had ownership control called the ARF, the import tax, etc., right? So now we're saying we're going to give you a discount, right, if you drive a cleaner car. Joshua asked, why public transport reduces MEV? Not MEV, Joshua. Public transport reduces the MPB, right? Is MPB 1 drops to MPB 0. MPB 0 drops to MPB 1. Is why it drops, right? Is because what is my benefit of buying a car? So imagine a person, right, who doesn't have a car. So I take MRT every day, right? So I walk to the train station, I take a train, and then if I buy a car, right? So and let's say my train ride, right, takes me to my work in 40 minutes, right? So then if I were to buy a car, maybe I get to my workplace in 30 minutes or 20 minutes. So I save 20 minutes, right? So then the benefit is relative to the alternative I have, which is public transport. Now, if you somehow improve public transport, so more comfortable trains, more comfortable buses, faster trains, for example, or trains where I get to sit down, for instance, right? Then all this will translate into public transport giving me a higher MPB to begin with. Then the benefit that cars will have over MPB, right, will get smaller and smaller. I hope that explains. Okay, so Clara, your question, let me draw for you. So if we were to write the quantity here, so 0, 1 liter, 2 liter, 3 liter, 4 liter, 5 liter, right? So at 1 liter, there is a certain price. At 2 liter, there's a certain price. At 3 liters, there's a certain price. At 4 liters, there's a certain price. So we are charging you maybe 64 cents to the liter, right? So then this hike, right, is always 64 cents. Right, so it is constant at 64. It's not like at 1 unit is 64 cents. At two units, right, I charge you $1.28. I charge you 64 per unit. This price, right, is price means per unit, It's not expenditure. It's not total expenditure. So it's a per unit value. Okay, good, Clara. Good that you asked. All this conceptual stuff not clear, ask and clarify it. Justin, no question. Can we argue that the policies aimed at reducing MEC is better to be implemented because it's still fulfilled? Yes, Isabel, definitely yes, right? The policies that aim to reduce MEC are definitely better in that it lets people, fulfill their aspiration of owning cars and yet reduces the problem. However, having noted that, right, those policies, right, don't typically solve the problem completely. They only reduce the problem. So therefore, they wouldn't be sufficient on their own. So they would still need to be complemented with other policies that like ownership control, usage control, as well as demand solutions. But you are right, right? You're right. The policies to reduce MEC are great. I give you another example, right? So when we talk about airports, right? Airports causing air noise pollution, for example, would it be better for us to, let's have fewer flights or relocate the airport somewhere where it's far away from residential area? Then obviously, right, relocating airport far away will be clearly a better policy because that still allows the country, right, to have many flights, right, and that helps the economy. Okay, so I'm assuming from the feedback I'm getting from your text messages, I'm receiving quite a lot of WhatsApp messages from people that this is, you guys quite like this, so we'll do more of this every week. Okay, so I have a Chloe here. I don't know which Chloe is this. Chloe Tan, Chloe Lee, I guess. In the exam, do we just write one to give an example, or do we write a few and then they say they all work together? Okay, so it depends. Like normally essay, 15-mark essay, as well as 10-mark case study, right? Chloe Tan Sixuan, right? All right. So in a case study exam, there is 10-mark question or essay question 15-mark, right? We normally do only 2 policies. So in this case, you just pick 2 of those policies. So I wouldn't just choose the ownership or usage control because that will be all trying to bring QP down to QS. That makes it more narrow, right? But I would talk about one of the policies will be about reducing MEC. But you can see where this is going, right? The full range of policies, right, are much more useful for you to learn for what purpose. Not so much for exam per se. It's also good for you to do interviews, right? When you go for things like scholarship interviews and stuff, right? Or maybe write personal statements for university. If you are going to major econs, then you're going to show I really got interested because I saw how a wide range of policies can be used to solve a problem, right? So this is only specifically for vehicles to reduce deadweight loss or eliminate it. I don't quite get your question, WJH, whoever that is. Specifically for vehicles, most of these policies are for cars, right? But some of them extend also to taxis. But there are separate policies for buses, for example. So I think by the year 2025, I think, if I'm not wrong, 2026, they are planning to change all buses to electric vehicles anyway. Okay, so Kiran, if we don't draw a pivotal MSC curve, can we still explain the development of public transport? Very good, Kiran, you are very sharp, right? What Kiran is asking, right, is that if I don't draw a pivoted shift like this, right, can I still show a smaller deadweight loss when there is a fall in demand? Cannot, right? Unfortunately, there is no way to show that. So, Kiran, you are right. We have to draw. If you want to show falling demand, reducing deadweight loss, you must draw the MSC as a non-parallel shift above the MPC. Yeah, so just Isabel, correct. So we have one set of policies to reduce MEC and another set of policy to either use ownership control or usage control. But if it's an essay question with only 2 policies, I won't use R1 as ownership control, R2 as usage control. That way I won't have chance to bring in the policies to reduce MEC. Right. So if you use R2 as reduced MEC, then your R1, right? I think either one will be fine. Either you use ownership control or usage control would have been okay. All right, I think that looks like that's all the question there is, at least for now. Subsequent questions you have, there are several ways you can ask me. Ask in class, text me on WhatsApp, or go into comment and type in comments. And if somebody comment, ask a question, other people, please feel free to respond as well. Chloe says, what about the policy that forces you to change car every 10 years? That's basically your VQS and the way the COE works out. So when you set a vehicle quota system, let me show this here, of 10, like Q max number of cars that can be bought, right? Then you use the COE as a licensing mechanism. Once a person gets a COE, to buy a car, you can use a car for a maximum of 10 years only. Right? Then after 10 years, you have to either give up your car or you bid for a new COE and have a renewed 10 years. So that's part of the VQS. Remember earlier I mentioned, Chloe, that the number of the number of quotas, the number of COEs, number of new cars allowed, right, per quarter, right, is based on the zero car population growth principle. That means every one car that is decommissioned and removed from the road, deregistered, right, will free up one spot to have a new car. So where do they keep getting 2,000 new COEs every month, right? It's because, right, every month, right, there will be cars that are deregistering. Every month there will be cars that hit their 10 years. Right, so that's part of the design to make sure that we'll always have some new cars that people can buy, but adds no new cars to the total car population. Suddenly, I feel like I'm working for LTA. Does the COE reduce? This is a question that came in via WhatsApp. Does the COE reduce the MEB of owning a car? Wait, MEB or you mean MPB of owning a car? No, I presume Xuan, you mean MPB of owning a car. Okay, so there's a question that is asked whether the COE reduce MPB of owning a car. It doesn't. M in MPB stands for marginal. Then the COE that you pay for, right, is a one-time fee, right? So it's like a fixed cost to the consumer rather than the variable cost. So marginal is that every kilometer I drive, do I incur more cost? I don't, right? COE doesn't change my marginal private benefit or marginal private cost. Hi, Chloe Lee. Yeah. Are you going to do a dance right after this? Okay. All right. So anyway, I pretty much assume that that's all already. We'll stop here. Anyway, it's late. It's 10:44 already. So everybody please go and sleep. If you can't sleep, right, go write an essay. All right. I'll see you guys in class. Bye-bye.